Welcome to CAE Pilot Podcast, a podcast that brings together aviation professionals to discuss life as a pilot, training, and career advice. You can find us at cae.com/CAE Pilot-podcast or subscribe to our show on your audio podcasting platform of choice. You can also find our video podcast on our YouTube channel.
Hi there. Welcome to this edition of the CAE Pilot Podcast. My name is Patrick Botter, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today for what I think is going to be a super interesting podcast on recruitment in the aviation industry, and specifically for pilots. Right now, we're in a situation where coronavirus has had a huge impact on the operations of airlines, probably the biggest impact we've ever seen. But what's important to remember is that the airline industry has seen events, maybe not to the same scale, but events like this. Notably, I can think of 2001, 9/11, and of course 2008 during the economic downturn. That said, despite these downturns, overall, the airline industry has grown and we believe will continue to do so. But where does that leave pilots who are just coming out of training, who might have started their training when there was a huge need for pilots, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a surplus situation? So these pilots are now sitting here contemplating, what do I do next? So what we thought would be cool is that we would have Captain Megane come on and tell us a little bit of her story about how she got out of training and how she went about finding her job now as a captain on the Boeing 737 for a great airline. And welcome to the podcast, Megane.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
We always start on the Pilot Podcast asking about your passion for aviation. Where did you get your passion for aviation, and how did you get to the point where you said to yourself, I am going to be a pilot?
My story is a bit different than anyone else. Most people, they always knew they wanted to become pilots. That was not my case. So both my parents were working for a national airline, and so I grew up in aviation. So my parents had cabin crew friends, pilots friends, people who were working for operations. So I grew up in that environment, but I never really realized that I could do that for the rest of my life. So what I did when I was 18, I graduated high school, then I went to uni, studied political sciences, and then one day I woke up and I said, that's not exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life, So then I started thinking, and all of a sudden I thought about becoming a pilot, went to the open house of CAE Brussels back then. Then I said, listen, what do I have to do now to become a pilot? I have to learn English. So I traveled for over a year to learn English. Then studied a little bit, mostly math and physics, so I could pass the selection test. And that's what I did. Started in 2008 and graduated in 2010.
From, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but from airline brat to
anything.
Yeah. No, but I think that it's I say it jokingly, and but you certainly had aviation in your life. Sure. And I think that's true of a lot of people. When you catch that bug and you see others doing it, you're like, this seems like a pretty good life. Now, let's go back to the beginning now. You mentioned that you had trained at CAE. How did your flight training unfold? Where did you train? What was that experience like?
It was great, actually. It was 18 months, probably 18 months. So like the best of my life, I would say. So that was 10 years ago already. So that was at CAE Brussels. We started with 6 months of, that was 8 months of theory. Then we passed our exams. And then that was followed by 6 months of practical training in the US on single and multi-engine aircraft. And then we came back to Belgium for the MCC and the last part of the multi-engine aircraft as well. That was 18 months in total. So that was really intense, really fast. But yeah.
Until recently, as I mentioned in the beginning, it was get out of, finish training and pretty much could find a job relatively easily right out of training. Is that Was that your experience?
No, not at all, actually. So halfway through the practical part, when I was in Arizona, no one would get a job. So we were there in the middle of our practical training, almost going home, and knowing that it was going to be tough to get a job. It was going to be hard. So that was basically the last crisis. And well, first thing people told us, and other pilots who had a job, they told us, listen, this is aviation, it's a cycle. Crises come and go. And then you don't really believe it, you don't really think it's true. But now it's been 10 years and I can actually say it was true, because this is already the second one I've seen in my short career,
So you leave training, and what was job hunting like for you?
It was first thing I did was, I went on the internet, find out about every possible airline I could find in the world, and send CVs, motivation letters, summaries, anything. If I had a number, I was calling like as much as I could just to see if they had received all my documents and all of that. So that was sending a lot of CVs, making sure I updated my hours as well. And just my CV with the new jobs I was doing in the meantime.
And how long did it take you before you got your first airline job?
A little over 2 years.
So, finish training. You've just invested all of this into your training. Get out. 2 years. What did you do during those 2 years? What was it like? Was it it must have been complicated or difficult mentally to say, oh my God, I've done all this training, now I can't find this job. But how did you sort of overcome that, and what did you do in the meantime?
I had a bank loan, like a lot of students, so I had to work. There was no question. I had to do something. But what I wanted was to do something that was related to aviation. So I got lucky. I called CAE Brussels and asked if they had a job for me, and actually they had in student administration. So that's the first thing I did, get a job as soon as I could to start reimbursing my loan. And then once that was done, second thing was making sure that I kept my skills, my theoretical knowledge as well as my skills, my flying skills current. Because, when an airline calls you, they usually call you to come the next day for the interview. So you kind of have to be ready at all times, So that was 2 years of working for CAE and then studying on the side, and keeping on flying, renting FNPT2s or sims, asking to jump seat on sim sessions, anything that could get me closer to a cockpit, basically.
And the value of staying within the industry, and in your case, specifically going into a training company, was super helpful, I would imagine, in keeping current and keeping your skills up.
Sure. Yeah, actually, that was very helpful, because I always had pilots around me. So anytime I had a question, or even instructors, I had a lot of instructors around me. So while I was studying, you always have questions coming up, things you forgot or you didn't really understand. So I could ask all those questions at all times. I was next to pilots who were, doing their checks as well. So if they knew that their company was going to hire someone, then they would obviously tell me. So that was easy as well.
So what specific jobs did you do at CAE?
So I was a student admin for a little over a year. So I was doing administration as well as scheduling. So I was scheduling the theoretical course for the cadets. And then after a year and a half, actually, I went on to work with the simulator technicians. So that was also very helpful.
Another thing that you just mentioned that I think is super important, because I've heard it from other pilots that we've interviewed as well, is you talked about the fact that other pilots would let you know that there were positions available at their airline. What's the importance of building and maintaining a network in aviation?
The reason why it is so important to know people inside the airline is very often before the vacancy is published on the website, they will know it. So if they hear, listen, in a few months we're going to have to hire cadets, and they tell you, then you have a few months to get ready, renting a sim, for example, or keeping on studying, or it's also important because if you want to get ready for an interview, you kind of want to know what they're going to ask, and it's not always the same thing. And every airline is very specific about certain things, whether it's aerodynamics or performance or meteorology, or every airline has his own thing. So that's also a great way to know what to study in depth and what you can leave on the side, because it's a lot of material. There's a lot to study, and obviously, if you only have a few days or a few weeks, you cannot go over the whole 14 topics of the ATPL. You have to know specifically what's going to be asked.
So your network not only helps you find the positions, but also really does help you prepare for an interview. And I think that's like any kind of a position that you're looking for right now, right? As soon as you're looking at your job hunting, you go on LinkedIn, who do I know at that company? You get in touch with them, ask them what it's like and all this thing. So I think that in that respect, while aviation is obviously a specific industry, it's nice to hear that just the general job hunting rules sort of still do apply as well.
Yeah.
On a recent podcast, we interviewed pilot Susie, and she graduated after 9/11. I don't know. Do you know her?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Okay. Jeez. We recently spoke to Susie, the pilot, who I understand and after 9/11, she had to wait patiently for a job to come up, and we also spoke to Leonard, who is a private jet pilot, and he had said that he ended up going to clean aircraft and at an FBO, and that's how he ended up working as a pilot. What would you recommend to people who are maybe leaving training now and going, sort of looking for their role? Would you say stay in the aviation industry?
Definitely. That's I think one of the best ways to stay current on your skills and theoretical knowledge is being surrounded by people that are in the industry. That means also you will be able to build your network, and if ever you have a question or you find something unclear, you can always reach out to your network, ask the questions that you want. Also, if they hear, and once again, if they hear there's a job opportunity, they might let you know in advance, and might buy you some time, to study and get current.
So network. My next question to you, so you went sort of the route of going to work sort of in perhaps a bit more of an administrative role at CAE. Certainly you've had colleagues who went on to do other things. What other kind of roles or positions can people have within the aviation industry to keep themselves current and to stay within the industry?
Actually, a lot of my first officers went on to being a flight dispatcher. A few of them worked at the operations of the airport I fly from. And a lot of people decide as well to become instructors while waiting for another job. These are some of the ones that come up the most often, actually.
And I think there's, having been around airports and airlines and all that, there are so many jobs that put you into the environment that I think you just have to, look around, and the FBOs, et cetera. And there's a lot of possibilities there. You mentioned earlier on that, your interview comes out of the blue. It's from one day to the next. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up, getting the call and going into the interview, and maybe a little bit of your personal story as to how that all played out.
So actually, yeah. So I've been waiting a little over 2 years, and then one day out of the blue, William Khalil, who was responsible for placement of cadets at the time at CAE Brussels, he calls me and he says, "Listen, this airline is recruiting, and you can go to the interview." And then, part of you is really happy because it finally happened, and you've been preparing for this for 2 years. And then, of course, what you want is, it's been 2 years, no interviews. all of a sudden I have one, I have to pass this one. Now I can say that it's not true. All right. So I was lucky I passed. But it would have been something else coming maybe like a week after, a month after, or two, but the problem is that if it's been a long time and you haven't had any interview, once they call you, you feel like it. If you don't make this one, it's never going to happen. But it is not true. So yeah, but it's. I was very anxious, I can say.
And so, what did you do to get over the nervousness? Like, I would say you have to go into an interview and just be yourself. Obviously, when you go into an interview as a pilot, there's probably a huge depth of knowledge that you have to bring with you, and stuff you have to know and revise, etc. So how did you get over the nervousness of that first interview?
It's exactly what you say. So one of the tools you have to lower the pressure is knowledge and being prepared. If you're prepared, you know your stuff, basically, it's going to lower the pressure automatically. I'm not saying you're going to go with your hands in your pockets and be like, it's going to be fine. That's not what I'm saying, but it's going to lower the pressure tremendously. So if the time you have now, you spend it studying and making sure that if they call you today, you're ready to go tomorrow or the next day for the interview, then you should be fine, at least for the theoretical part, For the, manual skills, that's the story is very similar. There are options that are not as expensive as renting a full flight simulator, So you can rent an FNPT2, for example, or a smaller aircraft, or, go fly with friends and share the costs, for example. And all these things are going to make sure that you're still on track with your manual skills as well.
It sounds like there's a certain amount of, I don't want to say inventiveness, but certainly resourcefulness. You have to look at what resources you have out there. And I find it interesting that you mentioned everything from, renting a sim to talking to pilots in order to prepare yourself. So there is a full range of things that people can do even right now. Now, the positive side of all of this is that, and maybe to provide a bit of motivation to graduates, is that after a 2-year wait, you finally got the job. What went through your mind when you knew that you had it?
It's funny. I think I cried. I'm not sure, but I think I cried. But it's 2 years, and during those 2 years, you have to keep believing it's going to happen. Otherwise, you just give up, honestly. So you have to believe it's going, but you have to, at some point, you're talking to yourself thinking, yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to take time, but it is going to happen. But at some point, you don't really believe it anymore. So once they call you and they tell you, listen, that's it, it feels surreal, basically. You're finally going to get into a flight deck. It certainly felt surreal for me.
And what did you do when you got into, because for sure it happens to everybody, I think even during COVID, those of us who are working from home and all that, no matter what you've been doing, you've had these moments of, hey, this is great to work from home, and then you get to like, oh my God, I need to see people. And you go through these moments of, ups and downs. During those 2 years, you must have had some downs. How did you pull yourself out of them? I was
actually lucky because my partner has been flying for now close to 20 years. So he was always the one telling me, listen, Megan, he graduated after 9/11. So he's been without a flying job for 4.5 years. So he told me, Megan, you have to keep believing it because it will happen. I know it will happen because, as I told you, aviation is a cycle. It goes up and down and up and down. And he was my greatest motivator, if I can say that. And then, all my ex-instructors as well who kept telling me, listen, but it's going to happen, It is going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
So you're saying it's the power of positive thinking.
Yeah, definitely. That's for sure. You cannot give up. I believe that if you decided to do this training and spend so much money, somehow it's probably because you like it, And you just cannot give up once you're, you know.
Have you been flying throughout COVID? How, like, you must have taken a break, I guess, at some point. But what's it been like?
I haven't flown for 4 months, so I started again in July, beginning of July. I had to go through 3 sim sessions of 4 hours in 3 days, and a lot of CBTs before going back to work. A lot of studying as well, because it's a job that is very automatic. So if you stop doing it, you obviously forget a lot of things. While if you do it every day, then it's not really an issue. This time it was 4 months without doing anything. And after the sim sessions and all the studying, I went back. It was a little strange at first, the mask and the new procedures, and a lot less people in the aircraft, and everybody was a bit of anxious and all of that. But I have to say, now I started again. I mean, it's been 3 months and it's much better. It feels like the new normal, Even
Right.
the mask is just normal. It's the new normal.
And I know a lot of pilots and cabin crew, for that matter, have talked about empty airports being super weird. And pilots have talked about empty skies, used to a lot more traffic. And even if you look at like a flight aware as an example, the number of flights is so reduced. What's that like?
It's a bit of a mixed feeling, because in one hand, we have a lot of direct routing because there are a lot less aircraft. So the trips are a little shorter. But it's obviously not a good sign not to have that many aircraft in the sky. So yeah, it makes our life a little easy, but it's not a good sign. So we're just hoping we're going to get all the aircrafts back in the sky.
And what about
as soon as
passengers?
possible.
Everybody's saying, everybody I speak to, if you could go one place right now, where would it go? Because right now the most exciting place I go to is the grocery store, right? So I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to go to Bora Bora or wherever. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I want to get on an airplane to go there. So what do you see from passengers as they're getting on airplanes, sort of, I'll say for the first time? Many are going to have just been going back to flying now. What's your impression of how passengers are taking it?
I'm very surprised, actually. You don't see a lot of anxiety in passengers. I think everybody's now used to the mask, washing your hands as much as possible, using the gel to wash your hands as well. It doesn't feel very, as I said, it feels very normal now, and people don't seem to be very anxious anymore. Maybe a little more in the beginning. Right now it feels, business as usual, I would say.
Yeah, it sounds from what you're saying and from what I've heard that, it's the apprehension of doing it. Like, you're kind of like, oh my God, it's this thing. But then once you do it, you realize that we've gotten used to, as you say, going shopping with a mask, going out with a mask. And this is just flying with a mask, right? So it's
definitely,
it changes. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. But if we simplify it. Let's come back to your career, because you've just recently, from what I understand, hit a milestone, and you've gone from first officer to captain. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Tell us what it's like to move from the right seat to the left seat.
It's very interesting. It's a great challenge. I'm really happy I did it. It's funny enough, it's a very different job. So people might think that it's still the same, but you just change your seat. The funny thing is, when you're a first officer and you don't know what to do, you look left and you have your captain. Problem is that when you're captain and you don't know what to do, you look left. There is your reflection in the window, obviously. So in the beginning, it's a bit, it's quite interesting. It takes a while before you get used to it, but it comes quicker than I thought. And no, it's great. I'm really, really happy I did it.
So, funny question maybe, but you've probably found yourself looking at the reflection a couple of times. What do you do when, like, you get off a flight and you're like, oh, I wasn't sure what I should do there? How do you prepare for the next one? How do you prepare to see less of your reflection?
Actually, I have my little, how would you say that? Tradition is, after every day when I drive back home, I review everything that happened in my mind during the day, and I think about what I could have done better, where I did good and what I can improve for next time. And that's I know a lot of pilots do that, but that's just a way of getting, always getting better, actually.
And we were talking just before we started the podcast that when I was a flight attendant, there were very few women pilots, never mind women captains. Do you feel a little bit like a trailblazer as a woman captain?
Honestly, not really. Not really. I don't feel different. Everybody doesn't have the same like every female pilot they don't have the same experience as me, but I've never felt different. No one ever made me feel different. So I must say not really. The only time I do have a bit of a weird feeling is when passengers look through the flight deck door and say, "Oh, it's a woman," and then you don't really know whether they're scared or impressed or happy or But no, I don't really feel like I'm doing anything for the community, to be honest.
Which to me is super positive, right? Because if it is normal for you to be in the flight deck and for you to feel normal doing it and not different, to me, that's a huge sign that massive progress is being made. If not in terms of the numbers of women who are becoming pilots, certainly in the attitude towards female pilots.
Yeah, it is probably changing. Although I'm telling you, I've never felt different in the flight deck. I know it has been in the past. I think it has been difficult for women in the beginning, probably in the late 70s, beginning of the 80s. Getting in a flight deck and having your colleague looking at you like you should be in the kitchen rather than in a flight deck must have been extremely difficult. They had a lot to prove, and I'm really happy and thankful they did it. And thanks to that, I don't have anything to prove anymore. And yeah.
And I think that's a super, super positive message for everyone. So aviation obviously is just a succession of different challenges, waiting for your job, getting through the interview, passing the type rating, recurrent training, sim checks. And of course, you've just talked about becoming a captain. What would you say are the key qualities someone has to make a success of a career in aviation?
I think resilience is probably one of them. Motivation, because without that one, you don't go anywhere. This job is a lot of work, and if you don't want to do it, then it's going to be really, really, really hard. Mostly, I think one of the things you will have to do for the rest of your career is study, making sure that you know your procedures, your aircraft systems, you're prepared for the flight today, you're prepared for the weather that's coming, you're prepared for the terrain that is at your destination, that your destination airport. So being prepared is one of the things, that you will have to do to get a job now and even after for the rest of your career. You come to work and you will have surprises, that's for sure. You always have surprises, but you don't want to have too many. So preparation is a big, big part of the job, I would say.
And finally, what words of encouragement would you have for pilots who may be, waiting for their next job to come along, or cadets just about to finish their training? What would you say to them as they sort of come onto the, they're on this kind of challenging job market?
What I would say is never give up, because it is actually worth it. It might not come next week, next month, or 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe a little more than that. I hope not, but never give up, because once you're doing it, it's really, it's really worth it.
Listen, for me personally, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I think you've said a number of inspiring things, I think, during the course of our discussion that people will really enjoy. And it's an excellent real life example, I think, of of coming out. You mentioned coming out of your training in 2008, I guess, during the recession, and you had to wait to get your first job. But here you are. Not only do you have a job, you're now captain, and I just think it's absolutely wonderful. Thanks so much, Megane, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was great. Thanks a lot.
And just as a final note here, I'd like to just let everybody know that after training at CAE, there is an aftercare program, and that's all about trying to help graduates find jobs in their field. And of course, we've just launched airside.aero, and that, of course, is Megane's talked about it. The importance of having a network and having resources. Well, on Airside, we've brought together a bunch of resources, and we're building a community to help pilots out there not only get back into the sky, but to help them throughout their career. So check it out, airside.aero. There's lots of great stuff there. Megane, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
CAE Pilot Podcast is brought to you by CAE, the global leader in training for the civil aviation, defense and security, and healthcare markets. For more information, check out cae.com.